giving a little bit of a heads up for what's coming. As Tim mentioned, that the future of AI is the physical AI. So I think what we are going to expect in the upcoming panel, we're going to see it actually being happen real time. So please join me in welcoming the guest for the upcoming panel about the Global Robotics Frontiers. Jenny Red is going to represent, obviously, ARIA, as aforementioned before. Michael Sudano, that's going to represent Woven by Toyota. Russell Nicholson, that is representing Mass Robotics. If I can ask you for applause for the guests, that would be fantastic. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Fantastic. My name is Dominika. I am representing Venture Café Warsaw, supporting the Japanese team here as well as an MC. I also have the unfortunate pleasure to let you also know that we are going to miss one of the guests. Tetsuya-san Ogata is not going to join the panel. However, I think the conversation is going to be a fantastic one, making sure that we're going to dive way deeper into the conversation. Thank you once again for joining today's session, and I'm giving up the mic to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Just a small clarification. I'm not here to represent Woven by Toyota. My views may or may not represent their views. I'm part of Robotics X Tokyo, where we meet every month, and we have a healthy group of about 1,000 people in Japan. Thank you very much to Venture Café and CIC for hosting us every month. It's fantastic. So, welcome. We're going to discuss international robotics and international robotics collaboration and what that looks like and what it's been over the past year and what some of the trends are and what they look like going forward. It is a very turbulent time, to say the least, politically and technologically, as many can attest to. And we have members representing some of the world here. So I'd like to take a moment for each of them to introduce themselves, and then I'll go last. But let's start with Jenny Reed first.
Hello, is this on? Okay, great. Hi, I'm Jenny Reed. I'm a program director at the Advanced Research and Invention agency ARIA in the UK. I've been doing that role for a bit over 2 years. Before that, I was a professor of vision science at Newcastle University. Worked for many years in computational visual neuroscience after originally training in physics.
Thank you so much. And we're going to go over to Russell.
Hey, I'm Russell Nicholson. I'm at Mass Robotics, which is like a nonprofit co-working space that helps scale robotics startups, like a sister organization of the CIC, based in Boston. And then before that, I worked at SoftBank Robotics with repairing peppers. And now, so if you know Peppercoon, I can rip its head off and put it back on. So, yeah.
I can also do the first part. No, I might be able to do the second part, actually. And my name is Mike Sudano. As I mentioned, I'm a co-founder of Robotics X Tokyo, originally from New York City and moved to Tokyo about 5 years ago after spending 10 years in Silicon Valley and doing similar robotics organizing. And I am with Woven by Toyota, formerly Woven Planet, formerly TRI-AD, and we are working on very cool mobile autonomous robots that I cannot talk about. But hopefully you'll see soon. And I do robotics operations mainly. And part of that has been partnering with other companies and other entities within Toyota to try and get them testing at the city and working with them to come up with plans for deployment and things like that. And luckily that has synergized, for lack of a better word, with my organizing and meeting other people. We haven't delved so much into international robotics, but we are starting to. So what I'd like to start with talking about is, just to be completely sort of on the nose about it, what are the certain trends that you are seeing in international robotics, and then what do you see in terms of the strong points of international collaboration, and any downsides to international collaboration, if there is such a thing. And I'll let Jenny start.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. It's an amazing time, I think, in robotics. A really interesting time for me to enter the field because so much is changing. We're seeing so many capabilities. Humanoids doing really cool stuff on videos and so on. But there's a huge amount of uncertainty about what are these robots actually going to be used for? And I think there's a lot that's not in place that needs to be in place before robots can really be as useful as we would like them to be for us, and certainly before robots could be ubiquitous. So it's interesting. I think we need more work on common standards and ways for robots to talk to each other. We need to figure out ways like a robotics black box, so that a robot can log the decisions that it made, why it did decisions. We need conventions around data, what does it store, how does it respect data privacy while also recording enough information to be queried afterwards. So I think there's a lot that needs to be done and is being done before robotics can really achieve the state I think we would like it to see, where robots are ubiquitous and helping us in everyday society everywhere. And I think that really does require international collaboration, right? Because it's no good having a standard that works in one country but not in another. I think international collaboration is going to be really important. And it's something we think about at ARIA, and it's part of the reason that I'm here at events like this, to build links and networks and ensure that we work together.
So that is a list of a lot of things that still need to be done to have ubiquitous robots. And you mentioned humanoids.
Yeah.
And I despite, Figure, Agility, Boston Dynamics, despite these companies that have gone full in on humanoids, as far as I understand, the jury is more or less still out on that form factor.
Right. Yeah. And are there standards around, can you guarantee their safety and so on?
Exactly. Given that list of items, so privacy, knowing what the robot thinks and does, which is related to, of course, LLMs, given that list of items that still needs to be fulfilled to have these ubiquitous robots, I want to turn to Russ and ask him, what do we have now that is positive in getting us towards that, if that even is the goal of having ubiquitous robots in our home?
Yeah, well, so that's kind of a point of contention with ubiquitous robots. I think everyone, like normal people, even people in the tech sector, they want to see humanoid robots because, you've seen movies and stories about humanoid robots at home and helping people. But I think often the actual business case and business model of humanoids is very, very difficult. And actually, Jenny, you mentioned like a black box. And I think I kind of want to tie to that concept a little bit, in that a black box, just inherently, it's like, I don't know what's happening, but good or bad stuff comes out of it. And in a lot of scenarios where like security is or IP is being protected, you're not going to know. And then when you're trying to have these humanoids acting in the world, I like to say example, if I tell the humanoid, hey, go rob a bank. Can you rob a bank for me? And will it say no? Will it do it? And if it does do it, who's liable? What's going on there? So I think there's a lot of questions on managing that. And then humanoids in general, going back to the business model sense, I think a lot of times there needs to be a model of support and deployment and systems integration and making sure they're doing tasks that provide value. I think a lot of times now, even with, I mentioned Boston Dynamics, they're first looking at their stakeholders, which is Hyundai, and they're testing robots in the factories, placing things, and already, even just in a light test phase, in their own home, home field advantage there, the union is saying, we don't want these robots taking our jobs already. Already they're very upset about this. So, and also to that, what is the monetary value? And I've just really quick, I'll wrap up too with, we've seen places where you pick chips. So I always say chip manufacturer, you think chips like computer chips, actually potato chips. If you go to the place where they're picking potato chips, I talked to somebody, they said, I could spend $1 million making ARM that picks these chips, but I have low-wage workers that do it faster and more efficiency than any other technical thing now, and I can have that today, and I can hire people to do that tomorrow and very easily. So why would I replace that with a really over-engineered solution? So I think there's a lot of just gut checks in terms of, does this make financial sense? Does this make business sense? I think there is a place for humanoids, for sure, definitely. but it's not as grand of a scale that people are kind of pushing right now.
I just want to tell an anecdote. So I used to work for Kawasaki as well. I'm a salaryman through and through, Japanese companies. And when I was with Kawasaki, we were learning, of course, about 6 degree of freedom, 7 degree of freedom arms. And one of our members who had been working for a while mentioned originally employing these robot arms in a factory in Detroit. And he came from Japan, installed them, went away, went home, came back, and there was graffiti on them, and some of them had been broken. So it's still a similar sentiment that there is pushback, of course, for robots taking jobs. And I see a lot of dialogue that the jury is also still out on that. Some people say we cannot fill these jobs. Some people say, we can fill these jobs, but we still want to automate. So to bring it back to international, do you see a difference with the sentiment of employing automation and maybe taking jobs? I can give Japan's perspective, but first I'd like to hear maybe the UK perspective and the American perspective.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. The UK has not got a great robot density at the moment. We lag behind in automation, and I think it's something we need to fix in order to improve our productivity. I'd hope that people, I was going to say people would perceive it as, but the reality needs to be such that the robots are not taking jobs, but the robots are doing tasks and freeing up humans to do better jobs, to make their workplace more enjoyable, to enable them to be better paid because they're now doing work that delivers higher value, while some of the more routine work is being done by robots. And I've heard some of the trade unions in Germany absolutely make that case very strongly. They completely get it, that our members are not going to get good, secure, well-paid jobs unless we have robots in our factories. And I think it's the message you want to get across, but it has to be the reality as well. If it's not the reality, obviously no one's going to be convinced. So that's where we need to get to.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer in this kind of shared automation as well. Same thing with self-driving cars. I don't necessarily believe in a fully automated car, but something that will prevent a crash if you do something wrong or if you are, incapacitated in some way, is fantastic. One thing I wanted to touch on, which is kind of related, is there is a lot of pushback lately to vibe coding, in that it introduces defects potentially and may cause developers to spend more time and more effort and introduce very nasty bugs that may not appear for a while. So to me, vibe coding and shared autonomy, it's kind of a similar track for hardware and software. Are you worried about that approach, that the robot might mess up slightly, but you might not know it? Like it'll butter your toast with drain cleaner and you won't really know it, and it'll get it almost right.
I suppose that's what I touched on earlier, that clearly you don't want to deploy a robot in a safety critical environment unless you know it's going to perform well. And you either know that because you've been able to make guarantees about the way it's programmed, or I guess you have empirical data that it's completed this many cycles without incident, and so you have trusted it that way. So I think all these things, in some ways it's not rocket science. I think it's just standard engineering approaches, but they do absolutely need to be deployed. And I think it's really essential if we're going to maintain trust in robots. I'm not sure that it's always great at the moment. I know a colleague, someone had bought a humanoid robot from a company, and it turned out to have a kung fu mode, which they turned on, and the robot starts leaping around without any kind of warning or checking the space. And I was like, that feels a little risky, that could have gone wrong. But again, you can overcome that, right? We can all think of how you could program robots to be safe. It's perhaps worth also mentioning in terms of the AI. So obviously, AI approaches have amazing power, but are difficult to make guarantees around. ARIA actually has a program called Safeguarded AI at the moment, which is exactly about, can you develop techniques for placing formal mathematical proofs around the behaviour of AI systems. And I'm really interested in that programme because clearly if it works out, it's going to be directly applicable to robots as well.
Bless your heart. Thank you. That's really what is needed. I think rather than, despite the technology bent of this event, I think running headfirst into some of these things, as some companies are doing, is definitely the misguided approach. So thank you. And then to get the perspective from the USA.
Yeah, and well, also to mention about the safety aspect, I mean, I think it's like a UI problem as well. I mean, I think just on that, you see scenarios where, you can have the most well-designed, thing, and I'm sure, I'll make a bad example here. If, your older relative has a phone and they're like, I don't know how to change this setting. And like, if you look at the UI of the phone, you're like, that's a pretty direct way to do that, but they still somehow just cannot figure it out. Actually, even I was thinking about this on the plane here, there's a guy for like most of the flight had the light on, and like only like, I don't know, at the last end of the flight, he's like, oh, I can turn this off with the light button? Oh, and it's like, couldn't you figure that out? So anywho, but on the US side, for kind of deployments of robots, we're definitely seeing more interest and more avenues. I think on the back end in industrial and manufacturing processes, definitely there's and that's a great space for robotics. I think I'll use the allegory to 7-Eleven in Japan here, right? So huge success, 7-Eleven Japan. It's really densely populated. It's really easy to deploy, logistics and get, service many 7-Elevens in a small area. In the US, it's totally different. The 7-Elevens, it's spread out. You have to drive. Logistically, it's a nightmare. And people are frustrated, like, oh, everything's so much better and fresher in Japan because it's a much more different market. And I think sometimes you have to realize, okay. That's just how it is. That you can try to overcome that. And I think that is totally the same with robots. Deploying a robot and servicing them and making sure that there's ways for them to be supported is crucial. I think a lot of startups, I've seen at Mass Robotics, everybody's really excited building robots, building solutions, which is great. But then the real business is actually maintaining them and making sure that they're working and sustaining them and over the long term. And it's not just like a Kickstarter and you're throwing it out and who cares. So you'll see that aspect in terms of getting to utilize robots in the US. Yeah.
Do you feel like there's from the workers' perspective, do you feel like there's any pushback to labor issues?
For sure. I mean, I think when there was that big, during the pandemic, we saw that backup in the ship that blocked the logistics. And then I think there was some interest in automating shipping. I don't know what the word is.
Yeah, the pelletization.
Taking the big shipping containers off, and it's a manual thing, but there are existing automatic options. But the unions were like, "Oh, we don't want to be replaced with this automatic thing." But from a business side, you're like, "Why not? This is so much easier. This makes a lot of sense. It's more resilient and consistent, and you still have people checking and making sure it's working and operating correctly." But you see strange pushbacks in strange ways. And I think it's our job to really educate. Well, I don't know if it's our job. It's someone's job. We have to educate the public how to interact with robots. I think it's often we try to meet in the middle. There's a lot of researchers and people designing robots for how they use and try to accommodate every edge case that would happen. Whereas I think we as society have to understand, okay, I have to expect a robot to do this, and this is kind of a new language to talk to robots, and it should fulfill this language instead of it just being this blank slate of I don't know what this robot does, so I'll just push all the buttons. So, yeah.
I know from experience doing operations and installations that the end users will find a way to misuse a robot. There was the martial arts robot. So I think we always talk about humans in the loop and how that is, crucial, especially related to, the emergence of AI now, AI tools. But I think we also have to remember that loop is not only operating the robot, but I think we should also think about the entire life cycle of how that robot's going to be used. So the humans in the loop are also the workers who may or may not be replaced. So I think, from a humanistic perspective, we definitely do have to be careful and try and get, not only buy-in, but really believe it ourselves and make the case that it's going to help people.
Yeah, and another just thing to add to loop is a lot of people don't see this equation, but business in the loop. Because a lot of times with robots, it's a product and it has to make a business case sense. And I think everybody, especially general public, likes to say, oh, I want to have this like Wall-E robot that talks to me and it's cleans and whatever. But then people have to also realize, well, what is this? Is this robot taking my data? Is this robot, what other purposes is it trying to accomplish, or interacting wise? So is it trying to sell me something? I mean, we've even you've seen with Alexa and all these things, they have ads and things, and it's built into your house. So,
Just to very quickly give Japan's perspective, if I can even speak on that. But what I've noticed, is that Japanese society, of course, has been around robots for years, be it in anime or be it in manga or video games, and there is this sort of comfortable comfort in using robots. And part of it, I believe, extends from a religious aspect, that everything sort of has a soul. You could see this in Japanese monsters and different things that are based on trees or umbrellas even. And so robots are seen generally as a force for good, and they're accepted. But there still has to be a business case, as you said. But I've seen at least less pushback from Japanese market to robots. I would like to pivot a little bit to security and intellectual property. So I was surprised this morning, coincidentally, to receive an email from Boston Dynamics saying, come to this webinar, join us, learn how we made our robot, learn about the decisions that went into it, learn about our UI stuff, things like this. And it's going to be in a week, maybe, talking about I can send you the link, how they made the latest generation electric motor Atlas. So that is a very forward thing to do, especially for a company that is really out there with competitors, and a company that's owned by maybe a little bit more secretive car company. So I'd like to get your impressions on, for your respective countries, how secretive the robotics companies are there, and what it might take and what is needed to kind of push that collaboration.
Interesting. I'm not sure I've got a great amount of insight to offer. I mean, my impression is that, of course, companies do want to keep their trade secrets and their know-how and get their particular advantage. But I think there's a lot of interest in the plumbing that we can share between us. So I was mentioning standards again. Something that's been on my mind recently is tactile sensing. So I think it's absolutely crucial for dexterity. But it's sort of dawning on me that we're funding various possible technologies that can produce tactile sense data. But one of the problems with adoption is no one really has any idea what to do with that. And depending on the transduction mechanism, the raw data is completely different. So it would be incredibly helpful if there was a way of taking that raw data and putting it into some common and widely understood representation format. And then, if you're a robot manufacturer, you can train your robot policy maybe once and then swap in a different sensor, and you just have to do a bit of fine-tuning rather than start all over again because you've got a completely different transduction mechanism. So I think there's a lot of interest in making that kind of information open source and available so that every different manufacturers can map into a common set of modules, if you like, that can help us build and innovate more effectively. And I think we see that in other areas very effectively. Like in the last session, they're talking about the software stack, that everyone sort of understands and can bolt bits together. And that sort of modularity and interoperability isn't really there yet in robotics. And it would be great to have more of that so that at least the interfaces are public and understood, even if what's inside remains secret.
So we do have, the robot operating system. We have ROS. We have Open Robotics. Is that it? Do you think that they're the ones to take charge? Would it be a company-wide thing?
Well,
would it be you?
They used to, so they just recently, relatively recently got acquired by Google. So, and it's kind of actually slowed down some of the development with that. And speaking about open source things, I have a few anecdotes. One was many years ago, and it was in Mass Robotics. There was a startup that was it was like a 3D printing startup. And I overheard a conversation, and they were like, yeah, so this VC wants like us to have like an IP, we are using open source Linux, how do we do the IP? The guys just add a password to it, and no one can see it, and it's fine. And it's like, okay. So that's not really good, because obviously there's open source licensing doesn't allow that, but it's like, who would know? And we've seen cases like that. But I think you see the pushback from VCs and investors. They're like, I want exclusive, protected. This is something that can't be stolen. But the market actually kind of needs to be more open. So it's this balancing game of how do we be open enough. And I think you mentioned thing with Boston Dynamics. I think they're I saw a presentation from them, and I think they're trying to have the gold standard of what even is humanoid robotics. Right now, there's Unitree, the Chinese robotic company. They're doing very successful in selling robots because you can just go and buy for $20,000 a robot. And it's really easy. You can buy it. Is it supported? I don't know. Is it open? I don't know. They charge more to have educational access or something like this, but that's their business model. And Boston Dynamics rather is we're trying to do system integration. We're trying to, here's what we're providing. We're training a model on what your problem is. So if you want to turn a valve, we're going to focus on that specific task and get the humanoid to be working in that method. And that's the state of the industry right now. So that's a better, more kind of okay, this is a full package, project, rather than I'm going to buy this and I don't know, hire some guy to figure it out, and maybe buy a hand from this guy and do that and plug this in here. I don't know. So you see that a lot. So again, the point of contention, I feel with IP and protecting rights, I think there's a lot of good work in startups that come out of academia, and as you know, students don't have money, so they're going to try the open source solutions. So if your product supports some open source collaboration, you're actually going to see a good market from academia and researchers and people that are trying to make your product. It really depends how you want to position an ecosystem. So yeah, I'll just kind of leave it there. Yeah, no,
I think the biggest takeaway from that is I'm going to go get a hand from a guy in a back alley and buy it and bolt it onto here. We touched on this before a little bit, and it's not so much international collaboration, but it is something that has been on my mind in robotics for years, is this idea of form factor. And some people, like I said, they're all in on humanoids. They're all in on general purpose robots. It should do everything. And I know you mentioned that. But what, in your opinion, and then I guess taking just sort of maybe cultural background as well, what do you think the ideal form factor for a robot would be? Is it general purpose? Is it very specific, Roomba, or something else?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I think I'm not very convinced that humanoids are the best form factor even for general purpose robots. The argument's always made that we need something to fit into a space where a human was, therefore it has to look like a human. I'm not actually convinced that follows. It seems to me there are many form factors that could fit into a space needed for a human. And I think certainly in the near future, it's unlikely that you're going to have a robot that's as general purpose as a human. So I think you should probably want to specify what tasks you do want your robot to do, whether that's moving boxes around and also opening the boxes, or define what you want it to do. And then actually within the program that we're funding at ARIA, we're looking at, can you then automatically design a body? Can you use generative AI techniques to figure out what the best hardware design is for that set of tasks, given the materials you have available? And draw inspiration from biology. So I've worked in neuroscience for many years, so I'm struck by the fact that biological bodies evolved deeply integrated with brains, and I think that's unlocked efficiencies that we don't see in today's robots. So I'd like to use those principles. But when I say that, people sometimes misunderstand me to think, oh, that means therefore a robot manipulator should look like a human hand. Like, no, it should use the same principles as evolution, but you're not doing the same, you're not designing a robot to do the same tasks as a human hand evolved for, almost certainly. And you don't have access to the same materials that a human hand is built out of. You just don't have biological muscle and tendon and bone and all the rest of it. So you're going to have to do the best you can with the materials you have access to. So if you feed that into a suitable optimization program, which is what we're working on, could you then design the best, most cost-effective manipulator, and then widening that out, similarly the best, most cost-effective body. Now, it might be that the manipulator looks like a human hand and the robot as a whole is bipedal and has 2 arms and all the rest of it. But I would kind of be surprised if that were the case. That would strike me as quite a coincidence. So yeah, I feel there's a bit of an obsession with having the humanoid form factor, which I don't really understand, perhaps. I mean, one stupid example, for dexterity, let's say, it feels to me in many situations it might be quite useful to have 3 hands. I don't know about you, but when I'm doing a delicate manual task, I quite often feel that a 3rd hand would be really helpful, 2 to hold both ends and then 1 to work in the middle. So if you're interpreting humanoids very literally, you're ruling that out. If you're interpreting it more metaphorically, then yeah, you could have a 3-armed robot. And I think Rodney Brooks had a great blog post recently where he predicts that we'll continue using the term humanoid for a general purpose robot, but actually it will look nothing like an actual biped humanoid. So I think I'm with Rodney on that one.
Fantastic. And what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree on that. I think one of the things I always really try to heavily highlight is before you have your dream solution, understand the real problem. So, and we've seen kind of adjacent, I've heard a startup coming out of academia, and they're developing a construction robot, and they're doing all this stuff, and then a VC was talking to them and said, so have you ever gone to a construction site? And they said no. And you say, how can you build a robot if it's not, you don't even know what it's going to be doing? And I think there are great examples of robots for specific tasks that make a lot of sense. And I think even automation. So, we're doing humanoid robots, everybody says, why legs? Even I've been to a few humanoid conferences, and if you ask the question, why legs, why not wheels? People say, you're right. I don't really have an answer. Yeah, they agree. And is more safety in that because the robots has a potential fall, so that's a big issue. But I think with that you see why do we need a humanoid form factor? It's not it's not super clear. It's fun. I think a lot of big thinkers, not really big thinkers, they see I want a human job. We need a human shaped robot. That's just the mindset, and it's okay, well, again, for example, for companies looking to turn valves, and I want this humanoid to go and turn valves. So, okay, how many valves do you have? 100, 1,000, or whatever. What if you just put a motor on every single valve and remotely controlled it? That's a solution. It doesn't even involve really a humanoid or any type of robot. Arguably, it's automation. Why don't you use a conveyor belt and an arm? Okay, that exists already. It's well proven. It's useful. Takes up less space, less of a liability. So I think right now I don't want to disparage humanoids. They have really cool, and they actually have really great tasks. I think in a workplace, specifically an industrial environment, you're going to see more of it. We have 2 or 3 humanoids. It's going to go reset a machine. It's going to do some odd jobs. It's going to help out, but it's not a super significant. We all have only humanoids in a factory, and they're all just doing things. So yeah.
Yeah, I have to agree with you, and I'm worried that the hype cycle around humanoids is going to blind us to other solutions, especially if it's not always a given, but especially if you are you have the freedom to dictate the infrastructure as well as the, object working within the infrastructure. If you can just automate something, then why not just do it? Yes, please.
Just another point to bring on that. I'm struck by this idea of humanoid robots is actually a really ancient dream of humanity. Right? You even find it in Homer, that Hephaestus is served by golden humanoid robots. So for whatever reason, this dream of mechanical human-shaped servants is something we've had for a long time. And I wonder if the humanoid robot isn't the latest iteration of that dream rather than being based in sound business sense.
Yeah, what is the motivation behind it? Is it vanity? Is it truly the business case? Is it a combination of both? But going back to what Russ said, always start with why. Why are we doing this? And then go from there. Related to segue, speaking about segues, related to this idea of hype cycles and also asking why, I'd like to maybe finish us out, probably take a few minutes for this, but previously with designing robots, designing and using robots, we had new tools, maybe 10, 15 years ago, of generative design. So, for example, in CAD, you might have a pillar, and traditionally you would, cook it up like an I-beam or something like that to optimize the mass where the force is going to be. And then generative design came in and said, maybe you can do this lattice structure or this honeycomb structure. This term, generative, has morphed now with generative AI, and I'm wondering how much you believe that term has kind of been co-opted for what is more traditional reinforcement learning rather than what it is now. How much of this new technology, generative AI and LLMs, is actually being used in robotics and used properly versus being rebranded traditional methods of robot learning and robot navigation and robot design, I guess.
Yes, your question is would you consider reinforcement learning generative AI? Is that?
Yeah, do you feel like the old is just being rebranded, or do you feel like there are actually new things being done in robot intelligence?
Yeah, just really quick. I've heard a lot of, actually, interestingly enough, I heard a few academics this trip to Japan say machine learning, which I'm like, that's kind of out of fashion. It's fine. But it's true because they're still using machine learning. But a lot of times people, you'll hear a physical AI for robotics. You're going to hear, generative AI, like you said. You're going to hear LLMs and models. Yeah, I don't know. I think it is true. People want to jump on the buzzword because it's they're relevant. But I think it's funny when LLMs came out, and a lot of people in robotics were just like, yeah, we've been doing this for years, is machine learning. This is we've been doing something adjacent. This is just another, a new, version of it. Why are you so interested now? It's
Chatbots.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's applicable to, a normal person, yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that question. I guess part of it is in reinforcement learning, if you're trying to learn the value of a particular state action pair, and you can do that using a neural network approach. So that, I think, is one reason for you applying these AI approaches to it, right? You're saying, I'm going to use a neural network as a really good function approximator, because that's basically what they are. So I think that's one reason for using the term AI there. I think there are so many things now folded under this general term of AI, right? At one level, it's linear regression all the way through to the transformer. And I don't know that it's super interesting, really. I suppose the questions are, what guarantees can you place around the behavior? And has the particular approach that you've taken means that you no longer know, if the input varies slightly, what will happen to the output, for example? So I think those are the questions we should be most interested in, rather than, do we call it AI or machine learning?
Yeah, granular, yeah. How granular. It's what's your favorite temperature? Is it, how many decimal points? Okay, can you tell a difference? I don't know. Same result.
I'm I'm absolutely, concerned, just like we were talking about before with the hype cycle, but I am concerned that these buzzwords are going to kind of overshadow, the good work being done, in labs or what can be done. I guess to bring it back to international, definitely in Silicon Valley, spending 10 years there, that, hype was just all around. And it was hard to cut through that to really get to the reality of what was being developed and what the potential was. Do you feel like in Cambridge or in the UK, is there more sense of a realistic take on these tools for robotics specifically, or is it more, VC business hype, not to diss anyone out there or organization, but where is it on the reality hype curve?
Oh, okay. So I think my guess would be there's going to be a hype curve dip before we finally, before it comes up again. So I think we're probably due at least one of those. I'm very bullish. I think long term it's going to be amazing. But that whose statement is it that you always overestimate the impact of new technology in the short term and underestimate it in the long term? I think there's a bit of overestimating going on right now, but long term that's going to come good. I'm sure of it. I think one of the bets that we made in the program of research that I'm funding is that new hardware is going to be important. That actually people are going to find that despite all the amazing new reinforcement and AI approaches and the control policies and so on, ultimately you can't achieve what you want to achieve with the actuators and the hardware currently available. So based on that, we're trying to fund novel actuators and artificial muscle approaches so that in the future, maybe in the next hype cycle, those new technologies will be available to use in a way that they're not at the moment.
Yeah, and this is something unique, I think, to our field and to robotics, is that we are actually affecting things in the world. There is a physical component to this, and for things like ChatGPT and other tools, it could just, go off the rails, there's no sort of benchmark necessarily. There could be a lot of smoke and mirrors, and that illusion can continue, and it's not going to hit up against physical reality necessarily. But for us, we're going to hit that physical reality. So that's a fascinating point. And then how does the hype cycle look in the US?
Yeah, I mean, like what was said, I think we're right pretty much at the top right now of the hype curve for like humanoids specifically. This is like, everyone's like, oh, this is so cool, this is great. We're going to have a huge dip because people are going to be like, they're not ready yet. They're not ready. And then it will level out and come back because there's the people that say, no, I understand now where these can work and how we can place them, and this business model makes sense, so we're going to see it like level out. But I think, and Boston Dynamics also mentions the same thing in there, that we're right at the peak of the hype curve. They say it themselves, they're being very open about that. And I think it's just really sad, I think, from the perspective, I see a lot of startups, and I see these amazing companies. They're really great, innovative tech, and they're going to be, probably a middle-sized, smaller company, but they're sustaining. They're not going to be a unicorn, and they're honest with like investors. And investors, they don't care. They want a big return. They want some unicorn and some moonshot. And it's sad because there's some genuinely great, awesome robotics companies doing really good things. They know their fit. They know what they're doing, and they could kind of go relatively unnoticed, and they struggle a lot with just getting to a steady state. So yeah, if you guys anybody in the audience touches on robotics or influences in your company, it's the classic, give it a chance. Obviously, do due diligence, but really try to help these startups, do POCs, try out things, let them help you. Doesn't mean you have to acquire them, but maybe you could. Maybe there's a lot of options. So
give them a chance. Just give them a chance. Before we do final thoughts for this, I wanted to mention that some of your words resonated with the gaming industry, which we are also familiar with, in that a lot of these smaller companies, maybe they have a hit, and then the parent company will say, well, it was good, critically lauded, made some good money, but not enough. That's happened at least 2 or 3 times over the past year. So to completely pivot back, I'd like to, in the last 5 minutes we have, I don't know if we take questions, but just to be safe, we'll keep it up here. But please talk to us afterwards. I'd like to just get final thoughts about what you would like to see the people who are here in this conference today do to foster a little bit more international collaboration, specifically for robotics, but maybe in the entire AI venture to bring it all together. Totally open question.
I suppose just talk to each other, get to know each other, understand what other people are doing, work together on those common standards and so on that we've mentioned, and share insights from different countries.
Thank you. And Russ?
Yeah, connection. It's just like super important, super, just connecting with people, finding, companies that are interesting with you. Sometimes, it might not make a lot of sense. You meet somebody that's making something crazy and you're like, okay, this doesn't apply to me. That's okay. But I think, when you find those connections, really just helping make them the next connection, making introductions, seeing, opportunities for them. Because, when you talk to people, it's like, this is, their life, their passion, this is what they're working on, they're trying to make, it's their dream. So, even if it's a small thing, you can help them, build it forward, or just say, oh, I know somebody doing something similar, or that could help you out. It's always, it really means a lot. And just that is a fundamental thing. And you can apply that to anything in life, I think, so.
Thank you. Yeah, and I guess, just to completely wrap up, be good to each other. Don't believe the hype. Give the little guys a chance. That's it. Thank you. I think that's all we have for today, unless we are open to audience questions. But I don't think so. All right. Thank you, everyone. Please enjoy the rest of the show. Thank you. Thank you, Russ. Thank you, Jenny.